The crisis at Campi Flegrei is escalating, but what is also escalating is the debate within Italy's scientific community about the extent of the threat of this 8-mile wide monster supervolcano that is pockmarked with more than 24 craters and is believed to have caused the most violent eruption of prehistoric Europe. Volcanic events can be highly unpredictable, and this new cycle of volcanic earthquakes that is happening there, along with this measurable rise of the ground that is currently at 3 centimeters per month, is very worrying. And then these large earthquakes. So an eruption could range from the kind of a limited burst that upended a boardwalk in Yellowstone National Park just last year, like this phreatic eruption, but also to something catastrophic. So the Campi Flegrei, the burning fields, experts are saying have the potential to wreak more havoc than Mount Vesuvius, that is about 25 miles away, and more than 6 million people are placed within Vesuvius and Campi Flegrei and a little bit around it. So worse than what Vesuvius did to Pompeii 79 AD. A number of scientists are warning about a potential tipping point of Campi Flegrei, and I'm reporting about these guys very, very often, and no one is warning more than Giuseppe Mastro Lorenzo, but also Di Natale. But let's start this video with Mastro Lorenzo. He's a senior researcher with Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, the INGV, and he's engaged in a public fight with the agency that he's serving with the INGV, because he's arguing that the INGV is not taking the threat seriously enough. And just in my last video, I showed you the discrepancy between what the INGV is saying and between what he is saying and other scientists are saying. So he describes a potential worst case scenario in which a deep fissure would open in the earth and spewing a mushroom cloud of noxious gas, superheated ash, and pyroclastic material out from that volcano. And he said at night emissions would be wreathed in lightning bolts. The view of the coastline would be shrouded by a deadly black veil. And in the aftermath, white gray ash and rock would blanket the land. And if it's a big one, not only Italy, this could impact the whole world. And even a significantly smaller but still strong enough eruption, he's saying, could devastate the entire metropolitan area of Naples, with like Naples 3 million, Greater Naples 6 million inhabitants. That's the small eruption. He says the pressure could release like a bomb. And some of his own bosses at the INGV are dismissing such talk as fear-mongering. And they're arguing there's no need to abandon this like beautiful land. But you know, after the 4.4 that just happened, he has been asking, begging for, can we at least evacuate the super red zone where we have all the epicenters of all these earthquakes and the strong earthquakes, basically around Pozzuoli in a 2-kilometer radius. But it seems the officials still think the danger is serious but manageable. They think the threat of an eruption is remote. They think the bigger threat would be a new wave of volcanic earthquakes. Well, it's happening right now, right? But they still kind of seem to think they can handle it without costly evacuations. And now with this major land rise, the port of Pozzuoli is having even more problems, because the water is getting shallower and shallower the more the land is rising. So the ferries have difficulty to get into the port, to get to people. So now they need to use floating platforms for their landing, because the ground has been raised there 1.40 meters. That's what they have lost in depth of their water. So they're trying to have floating docks at the port of Pozzuoli to overcome the difficulty of docking ferries where the port's not deep enough. So that's a temporary project that they're thinking about doing so that they can keep the ferries running. Because it's a problem not only for commuters that depend on these ferries, but it's also trucks that have to come in on a daily basis, transport necessities, food, medicines, all that stuff, other goods from Pozzuoli to the islands. Garbage trucks, for example, also are using the ferry. They're traveling every night on these boats. They have right now blocked buses and campers on the Pozzuoli-Procida-Ischia route. And you know, if you look at that picture with where the boats are basically sitting on dry land, and where you see the seawall, you see the railings of the seawall, and you see the land, it's like there's no water anymore. There's grass growing. Right now, over 340 people are displaced from their homes because of the recent large earthquakes, the 3.9, the 4.4, but also the firefighters had to do over 1,000 interventions to help people. A train station is closed in Pozzuoli due to the earthquake damage. And if we look at that graph that was just published, this is a graph that shows the land rise, the ground uplift that is happening right now at the different measuring stations. And the red curve is interesting because that's the port of Pozzuoli. That's the center where we have most earthquakes, but that is also where we have the most ground uplift. And again, since 2006, when the crisis began, we have 1.40 m uplift. That's 1.5 big steps. And we have Mauro Di Vito, he's the director of the Vesuvius Observatory of the INGV, giving us an explanation of this graph. So these graphs, he says, are the uplift of the ground along the coastline and in the Gulf with the different measuring stations. The variation between the central part and the periphery of the caldera and the increase in speed over the last 3 weeks are highlighted. So the data relating to the uplift of 140 centimeters is relative to Rione Terra di Pozzuoli. From the tide gauges, it is slightly less. So since 1950, if we consider both the uplift and then subsidence and uplift again, overall, the ground at Campi Flegrei has risen 4.31 meters. And Mastro Lorenzo has just given an interview in television, and that is very interesting what he says. He says, after the warnings that were issued in recent weeks about the risk of abnormal accumulations and concentrations of carbon dioxide in the Solfatara-Peschiarelli area, which pose serious risk to the population, the magnitude 4.4 earthquake on March 13 caused damage in the Bagnoli area. And after that earthquake, by the way, people are now reporting that the sulfur smell in Naples has even gotten stronger. So he says the recorded accelerations were among the highest ever observed in Italy. And Italy is a seismically active area with a lot of earthquakes. So the acceleration, this is what makes buildings shake. So even if it was considered, I don't want to say only, because for volcanic activity 4.4 is significant, but since the acceleration, I explained it in one of my last videos, was so intense, the buildings were shaking really intense. So he says this situation raises the question of whether the population should be evacuated or also moved away from the area that is currently experiencing the most intense seismic phenomena. So permanently moving away would be the best solution, but evacuate them now and then find other homes for them. And he says that a recent statement by the head of civil protection emphasizes that there is no evacuation plan in place, but it possibly refers to the emergency plan for volcanic risk. But he says, however, regarding the Brady seismic risk, the land rise and the earthquakes, the phenomenon we are currently dealing with, and if we look at the emergency plan, outlines 3 alert levels for a wide area that is affecting approximately 880,000 people. And for the most affected area, and that's the area that he wants evacuated, a radius of about 2 kilometers around Pozzuoli, where the most violent epicenters have been located last year and this year. The strongest tremors have already caused a lot of damage and have already forced evacuations. People cannot go back to their homes because they're not safe anymore. So he says, as a result of the earthquakes in 2024, already 1,500 residents were displaced and several hundred more had to leave their homes just right now after the March 13th quake. And he says the emergency plan for Brady seismic risk specifically states that if the phenomena worsen and they're causing greater damage to buildings and the environment, including rising CO2 levels, which is all happening right now. And he says the rising of the CO2 levels, by the way, has been somewhat been overlooked in previous assessment. The plan says it may be necessary to relocate the population outside the red zone. And he says, however, for this to happen, the emergency plan's highest alert level must be activated, which would require an official declaration of a state of emergency. And he says something that has not yet been done. And he's wondering why, because he would like it to be done. He says the challenge with seismic risk right now in this scenario that we're dealing with is both progressive due to the cumulative stress on buildings from thousands of tremors over the years, and it's threshold based, meaning a single strong earthquake could cause a sudden and severe destruction. And he's right with that. I just reported in yesterday's video about a structural engineer of Naples and what he said about whole Naples. What would happen should there be a bigger earthquake is devastating. And he has seen what happens in the 1980s earthquake. These buildings are crumbling like brittle, like dust. And we've seen this with the magnitude 4.4 earthquake. The whole room was dust. Ceilings were coming down. He says these homes are old, they're brittle. There's no grout between the bricks anymore. The wood is rotten. They're 400 years old. So what Mastro Lorenzo says is that scientists have warned that a future quake could exceed the magnitude 5. And even a magnitude 5.1, is that what everyone is saying? The head of the civil defense, several scientists and structural engineers could potentially cause structural damage, and here it comes, equivalent to intensity levels that were once classified as 9 or 10 on this old Mercalli scale. And that matches what the structural engineer said. It will look like an atomic bomb exploded in Naples. And what these engineers and scientists don't understand, why taking that risk? So also Mastro Lorenzo said, if that happens, this could lead to building collapsing and pose a direct threat to human life to more than 6 million people. He says, given the risk that we're dealing with here, the authorities should act as quickly as possible to prevent loss of life. Unfortunately, earthquakes remain unpredictable, and in this phase of ongoing ground uplift, we must expect further tremors of equal or even greater magnitude than those that we have already experienced in 2023, in 2024, and right now. He says it's crucial to carefully assess strategies to ensure the safety of the population. And Giuseppe Di Natale, who also works for the INGV and basically has a different opinion than his own institution, has just posted another explanation again, because in so many official announcement and press releases, they're saying, and they have been saying this last year too, that the 4.4, and last year they also said it about that last year's 4.4 was the strongest in 40 years. So kind of hinting at, yeah, there have been stronger ones, no problem. But he says the media keep repeating that the March 13th 4.4 earthquake and the May 20th 2024 earthquake were the strongest earthquakes in the last 40 years. And he says, let's do a quick calculation. If we subtract 40 years from today, that brings us to 1985. This means they are suggesting that some earthquake just before 1985 was stronger than the two recent 4.4. And he says, is that true? No, he says, because the strongest earthquakes during the previous Brady seismic phase had a magnitude of 4.0 in the 1980s. And he said, all right, let's try saying they were the strongest in the last 50 years, the two 4.4 earthquakes. And he says that I have seen officials state in some newspapers as well. Let's subtract 50 years from today. That brings us back to 1975. So are they suggesting that stronger earthquakes occurred just before 1975? And his answer again is no, because there was no seismic activity between 1972 and 1975. And the earthquakes that happened during the swarm in 1969 to 72 were significantly smaller than the two 4.4s that we just recently had. And he says before 1969, there was no recorded seismic activity in the area. And to find any earthquakes at all, we have to go back to 1580. 1580, that's when Monte Nuovo was found in an eruption shortly after. He says that year, in 1580, there was a devastating earthquake, possibly with an equivalent magnitude of around 5. Which means it could have been stronger than these two. It could have been. And he says, however, we cannot be certain, just as we cannot be sure that among the strongest earthquakes that are associated with the 1538 eruption, there were any stronger than these two. They cannot say that they were stronger at that time. So for him, he says, therefore, the logical conclusion is that the earthquakes that happened this March 2025 and May 20th, 2024 are the strongest ever recorded in the Phlegreian area at Campi Flegrei, and they are certainly the strongest since at least 1580. And then he says, he concludes, it's not hard to understand, and honestly, I don't know who shared spreading this false claim about the last 40 or even 50 years. He says this has been circulating since last year's 4.4. So everything looks like it's being played down, maybe a little bit. I don't know. Guys, let me know what you think. This was a quick update. It's not such a monstrosity like the last videos, but I have way more stuff that I want to talk about and way more interviews with scientists and another study that is very concerning. So wait for my next update. I want to give this study its own video because it's really, really important. So these are the latest updates from Pozzuoli. And if you're new here, please subscribe so that you won't miss a thing. You have to also click the notification bell and check my channel page on a regular basis because sometimes the notifications don't work. And if you want to support me and my channel, guys, become a supporting member. A monthly membership supports the channel and you're getting something for it as well. I'm releasing behind the scenes videos and outtakes and private stuff. And if you want to go to my buymeacoffee.com/silky site, you can support me there with buying me coffees. It's greatly appreciated. And also thanks for all the supers you're sending me here on YouTube, for all that you're doing, for being here, for watching. And I hope you're safe. And to all my viewers from the US, these wildfires, Oklahoma, Texas, and all the storm damage, the tornado damage, my heart goes out to you. I hope you're all safe and made it through. It's not good what's going on there. I've seen the pictures. So let's hope for the best, guys. Stay safe. I see you very, very soon. Bye.